Hi, everyone. This is the April 2023 demo debate on the public forum topic, Resolved. The United States federal government should ban the collection of personal data through biometric recognition technology. Speaking first on the affirmative will be Srikar Satish, and speaking second on the affirmative will be Tejas Balaji. And speaking second on the con, speaking first will be Conrad Palor, and second will be Ruth Dye.
We affirm our sole contention is a corrupt state. Surveillance policy sucks. Mill 20 finds that recent executive orders could be used to conduct the same surveillance authorized by the U.S. Freedom Act. Thankfully, affirming fights back against government control in three ways, and the first is ending the surveillance state. BLOS 14 explains the NSA implements technical platforms to produce information visibilities on populations. The NSA have a totalitarian mentality that's the greatest threat to the United States since the Civil War. Lowenstein 14 furthers, the goal of the NSA is total population control. The NSA is pursuing ordinary citizens and seen to be about terrorism, but the US has stopped zero attacks. This caused the NSA to be an all-knowing tower where they can watch over and control all aspects of citizens' lives through programming and monitoring phone calls, internet activity, text messages, and more. Most importantly is biometrics. Grade 3 finds that facial recognition technology brings the disciplinary power of surveillance to contemporary urban environment. Disciplinary potential surveillance, and the power to inherent acts and information collection and analysis. Facial recognition technology represents a leap in disciplinary influence. There's no limit on how facial technology may permeate society as the underlying technologies continue to develop. Surveillance power grows as various systems are networked together. The strength of the panopticon derives as visible yet unverifiable operation within, and surveillance represents that power. The second way affirming fights the government overreach is by ending decryption. Encryption is the process of protecting information and hiding it in secret code. Right now, the New York Times in 2013 notes the NSA has never met an encryption system that it has not tried to penetrate. In some cases, the agency pressured companies to give it access. This is done in order for the NSA to surveil the population and steal its biometric information. Larson 13 continues that they use supercomputers, technical trickery, court orders, and behind-the-scene persuasion to undermine protecting everyday communications. Affirming by definition means you no longer can use biometric technology. Specifically, the government encrypts biodata, which ends post-AF. Decryption is important specifically when it comes to biodata. Kozel 16 notes that biodata results from pervasive systemic surveillance. Dilemma on how to facilitate a cultural shift away from passive acceptance of data valence, which is data surveillance, or to reclaim agency over bodies and digital traces. This is the terrain for performing encryption. Whenever you end decryption post-AF and you end the decryption of biometric technology, this means that the government can no longer access it, which means that we can no longer have our personal information into the government. And that's how the government maintains control over us. The third is through chilling anti-government activism. Wong 15 notes that surveillance are intimidating sources, keeping them away from talking to journalists. This undermines holding government into account. Public understanding of policies is essential to the functioning of opening societies. Specifically, full-scale facial recognition discourages people to freely associate, engage in politics, or challenge the government. Lynch 12 finds the Fourth Amendment prohibition of unreasonable searches and seizures represent a baseline protection. It's unreasonable to assume that consent extends to our data being collected and retained in a database to be subject to repeated searches for the rest of our lives. Even though people voluntarily share a significant amount of information about themselves with people online, these consider much of this information to be piloted, such as a person's expectation of privacy is not having their movements tracked constantly, even in public. The fact that several members of the court were willing to re-examine the reasonable expectation for privacy 92 in the light of newly intrusive technology could prove important for future legal challenges to biometric collection. Specifically, Paglin 14 notes that pretty worried that the NSA information would make itself into leak investigations to make significantly more difficult to protect sources and inform the public. Thus, Dr. Owen 17 finds that social media fosters climates of communication that makes the ground fertile for social change. Users are reporting because they're less likely to engage in political conversations online because of surveillance programs. And informed citizenry depends on people's exposure to information. And aggressive journalism checks against governmental overreach. Monbas 11 finds that fearless speech preserves the value of democracy by continual critique of principles of policy. Fearless speech is fighting against subjugation. The impact is government control. Lack of accountable government ensures the worst social injustice and militarized violence. Roberts 13 explains that no citizen is secure unless the government is accountable. It is absurd that any American is threatened by unaccountable government and it can execute and throw them into prison. Noble 14 finds that near-term extinction could even be possible. The human race to survive, the most important thing is fighting state power. And this is also the basis for genocide and racism. Stoller 95 finds that the managers of body and life survival and the regimes are able to wage war, causing so many men to be killed, and that is the stake of the government. Wayne, we'd say the most important thing is fighting against government control. This is because of the root cause. Foucault 77 finds that under these structures, entire populations can be mobilized for the purpose of slaughter, and the power to expose an entire population to death is the undesirable power to guarantee the individual's existence, which is why the most important thing in this round is fighting against government power.
We negate the resolution. Contention 1 is indigenous violence. Native Americans are disproportionately subject to violent crime. Austin 22. Regardless of sex or gender, American Indians and Alaskan Natives are victims of violent crimes at more than twice the rate of any other race in the United States. Indigenous women are victims of rape, domestic violence, and other crimes at rates higher than any other race. The high rates of crime against Native persons are attributable to nearly 240 years of racist and destructive federal Indian policies and the confusing jurisdictional maze that is criminal jurisdiction in Indian country. Fortunately, biometric recognition technologies are increasingly used to solve murder and other crime cases against indigenous communities. Biometric technologies are used to solve murder cases. Absent this technology, most of these cases go cold. Nash 23. A nonprofit startup founded by retired U.S. police sergeant is working with facial recognition for Biometrica to find missing and murdered indigenous people. Biometrica's 5-year-old police source database of people who have at least contributed to the commission of a crime. With this software, investigators can track crime and criminals. And the United States government cooperates with Native groups with biometric databases with the registering of sex offenders, protecting victims of domestic violence, and help locating missing people. The Conv 22. U.S. Department of Justice has added 16 federally recognized indigenous tribes to its Tribal Access Program, which grants tribes leadership with access to major national crime data systems for biometric background checks. Inclusion in the program would allow tribes to register sex offenders, protect victims of domestic violence, prevent prohibited persons from obtaining firearms, and help locate missing people. Contention 2 is cryptocurrency. Biometric recognition technology will be transformative in the widespread adoption of cryptocurrency. Amper 23. Biometrics are becoming universally accepted, matching the adoption rate and growing number of cryptocurrencies. Ability to positively verify the identities of people will be crucial. To meet demand and keep customers secure, organizations that have decided to adopt the use of blockchain must invest in technology that reinvest the very way they authenticate and verify their customers' identity. Traditional forms of verification require people to hand over official documentation such as a passport or driver's license. These can be copied and stolen. They also include sensitive information which doesn't always need to be shared to identify verification. Biometrics can do this simply with customer providing a biometric sample such as a fingerprint, selfie, or iris scan. The impact is poverty. Figna and KC15. 5 million people are cut off from the global economy. One of the biggest prospects is using cryptocurrency to bring these billions of people roaring into the 21st century. That reduces poverty. Rastigar 18. Crypto could be used to provide a financial identity to the 40% of adults who are unbanked, most of whom are living in developing economies. Help the unbanked by creating financial alternatives in an efficient, transparent, and scalable manner. Contention 3 is the economy. Biometric surveillance industry is robust with growth poised for year to come. Gelb and Clark 13. The biometric industry is booming with an estimated annual growth rate of 28% for 2005 to 2010. At 34% annual growth rate has been even higher in developing regions, which are now major markets for the industry. Biometric recognition technology also helps with retail and small businesses. McConvey 23. Retailers increasingly have options for AI-assisted video analytics and data analysis software to harvest customers' biometric data in hopes of optimizing business. Lumio added facial biometrics to its portfolio of offerings last year with an integration of the Azure Face service. The implication is that the Affirmative would specifically get rid of biometric recognition technologies and ban it, causing a collapse of this industry, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and that obviously would result in a tremendous amount of harm. Contention 4 is fraud. Empirically, biometric recognition technology reduced election fraud in Nigeria. McDonald 23. The biometric technology actually worked. It's eliminated multiple voter registration. If your typical biometrics are not captured, you can no longer vote. Biometric technology is key to reducing instances of fraud. Gelb and Clark 13. Reducing fraud and diversion is itself inclusive since it liberates resources that can go to the intended beneficiary, and there can be more direct efforts also. And for these reasons and more, my partner and I strongly urge a vote for the negative.
Okay, Cross?
Yeah. Would you like the first question?
No, you got it, bro.
All right. So I guess let's start with just a simple question. Was movements like the Black Lives Movement and other movements like that a good indication of freedom of speech, like protest, people using their voice?
Well, I mean, if it was done properly, yes. But the issue is that the COINTELPRO had people who like basically went inside Black Lives Matter, restricted their algorithms and stuff like that. And so it did not achieve the potential that it could have. I
guess my question is that your first impact talks about a chilling effect behind conversations, but given the fact that like the Patriot Act, which allowed for domestic surveillance by the NSA, was passed more than 20 years ago, and we've had several instances of political conversation and freedom of expression. My question is, when are these impacts materialized? What speech is really hindered?
Right. So if we look to every single instance, let's look at the COINTELPRO You can even look to that, like when it came to Occupy Wall Street, right? Every single movement has fizzled out in the last 20 years and has not led to actual policy change. The reason why is because whenever we have seen movements getting
Because of
formed,
biometric data, not because of other factors.
well, yes, because our evidence would say that because people's like facial, like, fingerprints, their face, and all that other information can be like stored, and you can figure out exactly who is getting involved in these movements. It's called a chilling effect, where people don't go towards long term, like movements. Movements eventually fizzle out, which is why our evidence is very good.
And your impact is genocide. So you're saying that the U.S. is going to commit a genocide. When's that going to happen?
Well, our impact is not genocide. Our impact is about democratic peace, and not democratic peace. Sorry, like
Well, you said
democracy.
extinction, but I guess my question is, who is the U.S. going to go to extinction for? What
So
genocide?
the idea is that
who?
our
When?
impact talks about why it's important to not like to limit government power. With government power over excess and government having the most amount of power, the government has given the green light where they can go and do all these other things. If you want, like,
Well, my
like,
question is, when's that going to happen? If the government has
it's happening right now.
status quo, what actor or what group of people is the government going to commit genocide against?
Right. So the government,
US government.
yeah, the U.S. is like, for
When?
example, right now, undocumented immigrants, right? Like
We're
that's
committing
literally happening
genocide
right.
against them?
Yeah, like, well, what's like you can see the border, right? The worst human rights crisis that's ever happened in the last 20 years. Either way, that's 2 minutes. I'll take a question now.
Sure.
Let's talk about Native Americans. How does the United States, I guess, determine like the status of a Native American? It's through using like biometric recognition technology through blood quantums, right?
No, that's not what our argument is. Our argument is that there are people that we can use identification for to help solve these.
Right, I understand your argument. I'm
violence.
talking about something, and it will relate to your argument in just a minute. The U.S. uses blood quantums to determine who exactly is a Native American and like what percentage of land is allocated to Native Americans and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, I mean, we're not making an endorsement of that. We're just saying in certain instances in which there's indigenous violence, I mean, the U.S. has committed plenty of atrocities against Native Americans. We're not denying that. But in just this instance of biometric technology, it's good at stopping violence against indigenous.
Wait, but if biometric technology is being used in the blood quantum system, which has created a de facto caste system in the Native American communities, right? What is the comparison, right? You are using basically you're taking fruit of the forbidden tree. That's the point. Either way, that's time.
Is anyone not ready? Cool. Okay. In that case, my time starts now. Let's start on their first contention about indigenous violence. They debunk their own argument with the first sentence they read, which is that violence has been perpetuated against Native American communities for hundreds of years by the federal government. And now they're advocating that the federal government should step in and try to solve a problem that they created. But even worse than that, they're not talking about solving any problem at all. All they're saying is, oh, Native American people have been oppressed for hundreds and hundreds of years, but luckily biometric technology helped solve like a couple murder cases, which is completely disconnected from any root cause as to why Native American people are suffering and are being oppressed in the first place. We believe that all of our responses are going to independently outweigh theirs because we're going to focus on the root cause. And the root cause of this is government surveillance and control over Native American bodies. We say that this is happening right now and it's continuing. For example, what they advocate for is blood quantum technology. According to Churchill 96, rather than domestic surveillance, Native Americans were domesticated by a genocidal surveillance regime, which included blood quantum tests, boarding schools, and reservations. And it was made to stop any resistance from Native Americans to take their land and justified U.S. imperial control. Indeed, this control is continuing today because these tests are what are used to designate who gets access to Native American land in the first place. At that point, wrestling the sovereignty to govern their own people, especially with context of for example, reformative justice for people in the community away from Native Americans and putting that power in the hands of the federal government. At that point, we believe that if these types of blood quantum tests didn't happen anymore, which they couldn't if biometric technology was gone away, then there would be a significantly more sovereignty attributed to Native American people, including who they get to choose join their tribes and who they can govern, which also means that there's more room for reformative justice. But then secondly, the biggest problem with biometric technology, like they point out, is that it makes the really, really bad criminal justice system much more effective. We would say this is independently more harmful for Native American communities because Native Americans are incarcerated at disproportionately high rates, with Native American men being admitted to prisons 4 times at the rate of white men, and Native American women admitted 6 times at the rate of white women. And as we know, going to prison increases things like recidivism rates, thus increasing crime in your community. At that point, we outweigh, because by decreasing this recidivism rate, by decreasing the amount of people that get incarcerated, you're decreasing the amount of crime in the community, which stretches far more than just things like murder and rape. Overall, we would say all these arguments independently outweigh, because the biggest reason we would argue as to why people don't report crimes in the first place is because they don't have public trust in the government, especially when the government is a surveillance state that's been oppressing them for hundreds of years. At that point, we would say increasing public trust and decreasing surveillance means that more Native American women, for example, would be comfortable reporting their accusers. Let's go to their second argument about crypto. This argument is terrible, especially because most of their impacts are about the 40% of unbacked in the developing world. The argument is about the US, and they never establish a link to the developing world. Don't let them come into the next speech and establish that link. They have no impact. But even more than that, nobody cares or trusts crypto anymore. For example, according to like, what is it called? Some site, Hansen 20, we would find that after 2022, trust in crypto fell off the cliff, with across 17 major markets, trust plummeting by 8 to 38 percentage points. At that point, crypto is never going to be adopted, so there's no reason why this matters. Let's go to the third contention about the economy. According to Jefferson 21, we would say that this is actually bad for companies, because prices for biometric access control systems range from $2,500 to $10,000 per door, meaning that it's bad for business. There's other forms of surveillance technology. Thirdly, their argument is again about the entire industry and the entire world. They don't read any link as to why we affect the whole world industry. Don't let them do that in the next speech so they don't have any impact. And then fourthly, on their argument about crime, first, there's no impact for this. Second, their evidence isn't from the US and doesn't extrapolate why this applies to the US. And third, there's no uniqueness evidence explaining why this crime problem is even pertinent in the US today. It's just a fun fact with no impact that's impossible to weigh. Don't even evaluate it.
Start off on our contention one about Native Americans. Two responses to the top shelf response. Yes, the federal government has historically done bad things to Native Americans. That doesn't mean we can't amend it now. But two, the private sector can also step in and make sure they're the ones collecting it and distributing it towards the government. There's no reason why the government is the only factor that's being played into this. But then second of all, they talk about how the root cause of Native American subjection is because of government control and historically the quantum blood testing. One, that's not our advocacy. Two, blood testing isn't even a type of biometric. That's incorporating DNA, which isn't a biometric because it's not something that's obviously recognizable on the outside. That would be something like physical gait, or it would just be your walking, or how like your retina scans. DNA isn't a biometric. But then two, onto the idea of incarceration. The only link into this is the idea that they're saying that less people would be able to advocate. That's the cross application of their side. We'll get to that there. But then they say that there's less public trust, but that's not what our evidence says. It explicitly says that Native American women do want more advocacy. They do want to step out and call out their attackers, yet they have no capability to do it because they aren't able to identify their attackers. The only way this happens is when you have biometrics. On contention 2 on crypto, there's no inherent offense off of it. That's fine. On to contention 3 on econ, they just basically say that it's a $200,000 to $300,000 cost per door, which is too expensive. One, businesses have already incorporated it into their development. Our idea is that now businesses have to readjust and take away the technology they've already invested in, which costs a lot more. And two, just because it's costly doesn't mean that a bunch of people have to incorporate it. We just say we provide them the mode to do so. It makes the economy more effective on net. Contention 4 also doesn't have any offense onto it. Let's get onto their side. Let's start off with 2 observations. First, everything that you talk about is temporary. There's an avenue for reform that happens only in the negative world because the SWO has seen regulations for biometrics, i.e. through Illinois's recent Biometric Information Protection Act. If anything, we'd say the negative world always has a trajectory for improvement. The affirmative world stagnates it and makes it so that biometrics always stay in the never progress. But then 2, the alternative is inherently worse. Absent American intervention, it paves a way for significantly worse actors to take over. For example, the developing world is not going to stop using biometrics. It's been more costly to implement, and it's even costlier to amend all the changes they've made, which is why they've also seen the benefits of using biometrics, i.e. from proper food and welfare distribution. So if the US isn't the one innovating biometric technology, the developing world, who don't have the resources to develop this themselves, have to turn to alternatives like China, who are objectively worse. Look to their current involvement in the Uyghur genocide, which has only been facilitated by their extreme surveillance that has helped identify Uyghurs. You can turn their entire case because this leads to the ramifications of totalitarian states everywhere, because if developing countries aren't using a good mode to look at, which is the United States, which is objectively better than the alternative, China, then all the impacts happen in the developing world too. But then regardless, everything on their side is terminally non-unique. We have 290 million identities stored in the Department of Homeland Security right now. We should have seen the manifestation of the US state collapse, yet we haven't. Now, not to mention, we've literally seen the Black Lives Movement happen in the last few years. And while it's fizzled out, the only reason it's done so is because we constantly have a moving trajectory of what America prioritizes. It's been recent school shootings, for example, like the one that just happened within that Christian Tennessee school. Yeah. Onto terrorism. Couple things. One, we say that terrorist attacks are never stopped. That's false. Surveillance was literally used during the Capitol insurrection that helped identify attackers. But then two, onto biometric encryption. Considering that biometrics is a form of encryption, if encryption stops government overreach, biometrics is the best mode to stop it. Biometrics isn't exclusively something the government is using. The private sectors can also use biometrics to encrypt their own stuff and combat the government. Onto killing advocacy. Two responses. This doesn't make sense. One, biometrics being incorporated into surveillance is objectively the best alternative. Human interpretation will always be subjective, but AI has the potential to be objective and make sure it doesn't factor human biases. But two, surveillance always helps marginalized people feel safer, i.e. women who fear getting attacked. But in general, it helps the public because otherwise society falls into a panic if they realize that criminals can no longer get fingerprinted at police stations. If society is in a panic, they can't form conducive protests because they don't even feel like they can walk outside their door.
So do you really think, like, honestly, that the people who are protesting the police would feel less safe if the surveillance state was like smaller? Like if they think like, oh no, the police don't have like my biometric technology, I'm feeling so unsafe, so I'm not gonna leave my house to go protest the police. Like, does that like logically make sense?
I'm not saying that I want the government to have my biometric data. I'm saying that I want the government to have the biometric data of criminals who have a history of rape, murder, etc. If they have the fingerprints there, they're more identifiable when they go onto crime scenes, and they can see a fingerprint and they can match it with another fingerprint in the database.
That's cool. I didn't ask about you. Like, that's fine that you think that. Cool.
I think
But I'm asking about the protesters that you were speaking for at the end of the speech, right?
It's a pretty objective view that fingerprinting is inherently a good way to make sure that you're able to like see if people are marked at the scene. It's actually a pretty distinctive way to make sure that the government doesn't have independent biases that they can factor in, like police saying, oh, I saw this person at the crime scene. Well, do they have fingerprints there? No, unless they don't, there's no distinctive way to place them there.
Okay, we're getting to this like very specific fingerprint debate, but what I'm asking you is like, again, right? Our policy and advocacy is very much about decreasing the amount of surveillance power overall that like the police state has over the people. Do you genuinely believe that protesters wouldn't want to go outside if the police state was less powerful? Like, do you really think that like people who are protesting the police agree with you on this position? Like, genuinely?
Yes, genuinely, I do.
Sir, you can have a question.
I don't have one.
Okay, what is your like second observation? Are you saying that like other countries model the US? Is that it?
No, that's not it. It's saying because the American world is the ones that are innovating like biometrics right now, and they have a specific influence on the developing world, that trend is good. And that only happens in the negative world because we're perpetrating the quo. However, the affirmative world derails that and makes it so that developing worlds who already want to have biometrics right now and they want to retain the biometrics they have to turn to other alternatives to continue the innovation trajectory they're on, which is turning to China, i.e.
Why is that worse? Also, wait, I'm confused, right? Wait, so you're saying that these countries would limit their biometric technology collecting because the US did it, and then they would turn to China because they still want biometric technology?
They wouldn't limit it. If the US government isn't properly innovating biometric technologies and they stop all progress into it, they have to turn to other countries to continue their trajectory, to continue implementing it, etc.
I thought that the observation analysis you made was modeling, not that they were buying. What evidence do you have that countries are buying or modeling specifically biometric innovation technology? Like,
they're currently buying from the United States.
Yeah. Who's doing that? Which countries are buying and from who?
India. The US, India buying from the United States.
India's buying what biometric technology from the United States?
Like the biometric collection abilities. Like,
which biometric collection ability? Why does India not have the scientific prowess to make this themselves? Like, what uniquely is the US doing that India can't build themselves in relation to biometric technology?
So there's a couple reasons, right? A couple reasons why, right? First, it's just a very idea that people are able, like the businesses that are in biometrics right now are stationed in the United States and they've built all their resources and facilities in it right now. If you ban biometrics within those industries, that's an on-net investment loss that all of them have to suffer through. because
Okay.
they already have stationed their things there, but that's
All
cross.
right, that's fine.
Let's start with their C1, lots of issues. First, they have not done any sort of comparison with the root cause analysis that says the reason why genocide happens against Native Americans is because of government power. Whenever government has too much overreach, they use that power to be able to do this. That's the Smith and Foucault evidence was conceded at the bottom of case and read in rebuttal. They just say that they are going to admit that's not their advocacy. That doesn't matter. The idea is that it creates serial policy failure. If the root cause is government failure, the government power, when the government goes in more and more and they create more and more of those issues, has always been happened. No matter what, it's doomed to fail. That's why every single surveillance policy of the United States against indigenous people has always failed and has always led to more violence. That's why they have no uniqueness in this claim. Violence is high right now. The only solution is to vote AF, so AF gets the risk of solvency. Specifically, let's go to the blood quantum tech turn. They just say that it's DNA. No, they've misunderstood the argument. The argument is that it used facial recognition technology to go and cross-check with their databases. So what they do is they look at people and like, okay, is this person enough the indigenous person to be able to get land? And that's how it works. That's clearly facial recognition technology. That's not just DNA. DNA may be one aspect of it, but this is the way that it's being done right now. We're going to go for the criminal justice reform turn. They say it's a cross application of case. It's not. Let's extend it. What happens is the biometric recognition technology increased the ability for the criminal justice system, and that creates more recidivism because the United States has a really racist system because, again, government power. This is why the implication on scope is really clear. There was 4 times the higher rate of white men and 6 times the higher rate of white women. This outweighs in 3 reasons. A, it creates more cyclical poverty. Cyclical poverty is probably going to be another root cause of their argument and a prereq to their entire argument because recidivism causes cyclical poverty, but also B, it outweighs on scope. They are impacting people that are existing inside the U.S. surveillance network. That's not every single Native American, but our argument is going to outweigh on scope because of that, and it's going to affect even other minorities as well. So we have higher scope and on probability because this is 100% conceded. The only response was that's an XAP of case. It's not. We're going to go for the business turn as well because we have time on C3. Extend Jefferson. It says for small businesses, the prices are super high, so that causes small businesses to not enter the market. There you have 2 responses. The first one is that businesses have already incorporated this. This does not account for small businesses that are about to enter the market but simply cannot because there's so much money being spent on biometric technology surveillance that's need to. They say that a bunch of incorporated. That does not matter. This A outweighs on long term because it means that a bunch of startups for venture capital are imported, but B, this takes out their China stuff because all these startups that are able to do like biometric technology can help us win that innovation race, and the only way to do that is through startups, because they're the most innovative. Let's go on the AF case. I've already extended the weighing about why government power comes first, so let's now win a link. They just give you a bunch of things about like why they just give you a bunch of things about like oh yeah, the first thing is that they say it's temporary, but that not unique to the AF as well. If every state's going to have biometric technology surveillance, that means that they're also going to have this surveillance against Native Americans, which means that this is not unique no matter what. It doesn't matter for the debate, but also our arguments that does not interact with our argument that says that government power no matter what and surveillance is bad, even if it's done by the states. Like that's like the federal government is what is our like entire like advocacy. We're going to go for our activism link. Our argument says that empirically, which takes out every single one of their argument, the United States uses biometric technology surveillance to go and arrest people that do protest, which has caused a chilling effect, which is why there's less checkbacks against the government. That links to the most important thing. Both the responses literally do not interact, or it outweighs on probability because we have the actual empirics on our side. Thus, you affirm.
On the economy argument, no impact was extended in the summary, as well as their only turn is that small businesses have the prices high, but small businesses get to choose whether or not they invest it. It's if they invest, it's because they think it's a good capital decision. Now on the indigenous argument, this is the most important argument in the round for 3 reasons. First, on magnitude. Violence against Native women have long been forgotten and overseen, and Native women are twice as likely to be victims of interpersonal violence, such as domestic violence, murder, as well as other harmful effects. This has long been forgotten and should be the most important impact in the round. Second, it controls the internal link to all other forms of violence that they're talking about, as violence against women is modeled globally, and specifically domestic violence and interpersonal violence needs to be prioritized in this debate round. And third, on time frame, we've got evidence that it's happening now and that biometrics is able to resolve this, whereas their impacts are completely nebulous and they've given no time frame for when these arguments are going to happen. The link extension is pretty clear. Extend the Austin 22 card that nonprofit organizations are the ones that are providing biometric data to Native American groups, and that they've extended databases to resolve cases of violence. This answers a lot of their responses because they say the U.S. federal government's a bad actor. Our actor isn't the federal government. Our argument is that the resolution curtails all biometric recognition technology for both the public and private sector. They have not read any evidence that nonprofit actors are bad. That means we have a clear link into the argument and that it's able to resolve violence against Native communities. The only, they have a couple of other turns that they try to read. The first turn is that the blood quantums turn. First, extend the response that DNA evidence is not biometric. biometrics. Streetcar gives a confusing answer to this, but it's not biometric data. And biometric data is comparatively better than human interpretations because humans are like more biased than an algorithm is. And then they say that more native people are going to go to prison. First of all, there's no impact read to this turn. So even if you grant this at the point where we're stopping violence against indigenous women, that's more important. But secondly, you extend the fact that there's that the biometric data is actually comparatively, they have no link into why biometric data increases criminalization of indigenous groups. There's no reason as to why that's true, and that biometric data is comparatively better than the federal government going in, or like human interpretations would send people to prison. They've read no evidence, link evidence specific to biometric data on their case. First, as an overview, you're going to want to extend that all of their impacts are temporary and they're solved through regulation. We give the example of Illinois. This proves in the long run, the status quo is a trajectory of resolving itself, which means this is a check against all of their impacts. Their impact is government overstretch and serial policy failure. That's obviously going to be answered by the fact that regulation is going to check back the United States federal government, and they've dropped the turn that absent the United States federal government, it's other actors like China who are moderate globally who actually commit genocide. I asked them in the first crossfire, what genocide is the US government committing? They couldn't give me an answer. They have no impact evidence. The time frame to their argument is not clear. They've read no evidence about how protests have been stopped and how any oppression has happened in the real world. At that point, you're always going to prioritize violence against indigenous women as it's happening now, and we're able to resolve the impact now through biometric technology provided not by the federal government, but by nonprofit actors. That's the reason why you should be voting for the negative. I guess just start with the impact to the AF case. So your entire impact is activism, but like, again, what is an example of an activist movement that was stopped as a result of biometric data in specific?
We didn't really go for that. So, but the idea is the specific thing. I can give you 4 actually. The first was what's called like Occupy Wall Street. COINTELPRO went in and they had people like use biometric surveillance technology, and they were able to figure out who exactly does it. So they were able to arrest people before things were able to happen, fizzled it out. Second,
but why is Occupy Wall Street inherently a good thing or good movement? What
it's because it fights against like the oppression that businesses do. And okay, I don't think that any sort of
so that's the impact that you're going for, is that maybe that this one protest would have been affected at stopping.
Well, like you noted, we're not going for cases.
Yeah. So. Wait, also Conrad, you just asked.
Okay, so then what turns are you going for? You
go for Conrad, you asked us to give you examples of like this happening. These are the examples. Like, there's no reason as to why we need to, because our examples happen to be Occupy Wall Street, our entire impact is Occupy Wall Street. We never made that claim. Our claim is that like protesting against the government is good, which you should probably agree with, given that you spent much of your case explaining why the government has completely ruined Native American communities for hundreds of years. And probably stopping protests makes the government much less accountable to those same.
I mean, our argument is that biometric technology has been happening for a long time with no measurable effect on protests. Okay, so
we'll take a question now. Yeah. So let me figure out what you're reading again. Okay, so just to clarify, the only front line was I'm too confusing in summary, and you extend the blood quantum's turn, right?
No. Shrieker, let's make this clear, right? Blood quantum testing is testing blood, which is literally DNA. You trying to say that facial recognition?
So no, what's been happening right now in recent years? Yeah, what's been happening right now? And well, one, there was no evidence read that says like this has been overturned. But what the truth is, but what actually is happening is what people have been doing. They've been using facial recognition technology to like look at Native Americans and be like, okay, how does this face match up?
That's not blood quantum testing.
That's Churchill.
Their entire turn was relying on the fact that blood quantum testing was really, really bad.
Also, and we're saying that it's taken a new form now.
Also, it's weird about how the U.S. federal government does this to restrict land, but land's been restricted long before we had biometric technology.
Wait. I
think you're right. The government has always been bad and always will be bad, and probably giving
our argument is that
surveillance power over Native communities is probably also bad.
No, wait, Tejas, let's make something clear, right? Yes, the federal government sucks. Here's the problem, though, because biometric technology has been proliferating recently, and we've seen the regulation of states individually make sure that biometrics happens in the correct lens. We've seen the federal government get checked back. That only happens if you continue regulating biometrics in the negative world like we're doing right now, but you also make sure that there's the benefits of the negative world, like we ensure that developing countries don't turn to China, or that we make sure that Native American tribes specifically make sure that they get retribution.
Also, all our link
Wait,
evidence
what? This makes no sense if your whole thing is like the states. Number one, most of the advocacy on this topic is that like the federal government model should be modeled after the Illinois law, which was only one law, and you haven't proved that there's any trajectory that it's changing. And two, even if it is going to be proliferated to every single state, like Shrieker said, and like it was conceded in the last speech, that means that that just non-uniques all of the affins in the round, and you haven't given us a single reason why we should presume for you. So it doesn't make any sense.
Let's clear this up. BIPA doesn't ban biometric technologies. All it does, it makes it so that when you collect it, you need like consent, for example.
Wait, so is this like a T inter? Because the resolution says to ban biometric technology.
Yeah, and BIPA is not banning biometric technologies. It's just making sure that it's regulated and the distribution of it is regulated.
All right, time starts now. We'll concede all the reasons why indigenous violence should come first. Like, that's totally fine. We're going for a turn on their case. It doesn't matter. Let's extend our turn. Our turn is essentially that biometric technology is used by the police state to, for example, through facial recognition technology, to find criminals and arrest them. The problem is that the government is systemically racist against indigenous communities, which is why, for example, Native American men get arrested 4 times more than white men. Native American women get arrested 6 times more than white women. This evidence has been completely contested and completely conceded in every single speech. This is bad because when incarceration goes up, recidivism also increases. This is terrible for these types of communities because first, it increases cyclical poverty, causing intergenerational poverty that these communities cannot escape, which then links into crime and increases crime, which is their argument, meaning we link in, and also outweigh on scope because we're talking about all types of crime and we're talking about intergenerational crime. While at best, at the very, very maximum, all they can do is maybe arrest a couple people. They don't even solve the problem of the crimes being perpetuated in the first place, and they've never read a stipulation as to why they do so. At that point, that argument was completely conceded. It has nothing to do with the blood quantum argument at all, so we don't need that link to win this argument either. The evidence about incarceration being higher was also conceded, and all of the weighing that Shrieker made as to why this outweighs their argument on scope and as a prerequisite was also conceded. At that point, if we're evaluating Native American violence, by all means, we should just win the round right now. But even then, like, let's look at their argument. Their argument is that there's high levels of crime perpetuated against Native American communities. That's fine, but the problem is that they don't stop any of that. They don't solve the root cause. All they do is maybe enable police actors to like arrest more people. Secondly, they say that NGO actors can do this, but their whole argument is about decreasing crime through arrest, meaning the police state has to use this in the first place.
Is pretty simple. We know that Native Americans have historically been subjugated by the federal government. However, the only mechanism to solve back for the amount of abuse that have been happening to a Native American woman is by making sure that biometrics can track down criminals that have exacted such crimes onto them. That only happens in the negative world because in the affirmative world, when you ban biometric technologies, there's no way to check back on this. The incarceration they put onto this is really, really bad for a couple of reasons. One, we tell you incarceration happily is a lot better when you use biometrics because there is no incorporation of human biases and human prejudices. This turn that was read on their case from second rebuttal goes clean conceded. But then second of all, we tell you their idea of saying it links into generational poverty, which links into crime, isn't actually responsive because we're not talking about Native American on Native American crime. We're talking about other actors making sure that Native American women are hurt. In that instance, we say the only ones exacting it are the white supremacists or actors like that. But then besides that, they try to say that their whole argument outweighs because they access the serial state. One, they don't even extend their own case. They just extend a turn. But then second of all, we say on the serial state, we're the best solvency for it because we tell you that right now, all their impacts they're talking about are inherently temporary. Because we have biometrics right now and they're making sure that certain groups get advocacy, we're making sure that groups are amending for the mistakes that the federal government has made previously. However, there also are checkbacks like BIPA, which don't ban biometric technologies. All they do is regulate it so that consent is achieved every single time, which means that when they talk about Native Americans inherently not getting the right amount of use, it's like saying we still inherently solve for it because we make sure that consent is achieved in the negative world. Yet in the affirmative world, no regulation is achieved because biometrics don't have the ability to progress. They're just banned and they never play a role in the government. Besides that, the alternative observation goes clean conceded in first final, which means that it is the best place for you to vote off of it. We know because the United States is an innovation market for the developing world. If there is no United States to turn to, they must turn to all their alternatives like China. In that instance, they model after China, which inherently adds a lot worse abuses like they're actively doing in the Uyghur genocide, which means there's serial state failure around the world. We co-opt every single impact they have and manifest it and magnify it tenfold.